Sometimes I just need to write. I have ADHD and I've had it my whole life, and it's affected me with varying degrees of intensity. But when I've gone too long without writing something, I can't sleep. I'm kept up by dialogue and worlds that only exist in my imagination, and there have been nights where I've been up until 3 a.m. just trying to sleep. Turning over in my bed until my sheets have become twisted around me like a chrysalis. At these moments, I have no choice but to get out of bed, boot up my computer, and type whatever crazy shit's going on in this fucked up brain of mine. The result is that I have about 100 short stories of varying quality sitting on my Dropbox that no one will likely ever see, that were written because I couldn't sleep. When I started this channel, it was at a time in my life where I lived alone and wasn't interested in anything so plebeian as sex with a woman. Spent all my free time thinking in silence, and this is where my creativity blossoms, when I'm alone with my crazy thoughts. Lately, I've been more focused on my social life, and things have become chaotic because of it. When you involve other people in your life, you invariably invite some conflict into it as well. Feelings get hurt, you say things you don't mean, passion gets the better of you, you gain, you lose. Now when I sit down to write, I'm concerned about things I never thought about, like YouTube. Concerned with numbers, in fact. Numbers that I never thought I would have. Writing on them going up, writing on them going down, examining old videos, trying to figure out a formula to their success, and why I'm having so much trouble replicating it now. Why my videos are failing to catch on, shit like that. It's that thing that affects all creators in just about every field at some point in their life. The idea that all their best work is in the past. I used to be at peace, and now I feel like I'm climbing that fucking ladder in Metal Gear Solid 3. So I was sitting at home Friday night getting ready to party in downtown Orlando, and I got to playing Vermintide 2. I played for about 4 hours until I realized it was time to go. So I didn't. I just kept playing the game. Now I'm sitting here, after a 4-hour play session, trying to think of what to write, and I have nothing, to be honest. I figured, shit, here it is. I'm finally burnt out. I got not a goddamn thing to say. I thought I might have something to say about Vermintide, and to be honest, I probably would if I was in the right frame of mind, but I just got like my ceremonial 100th rejection letter from a literary agent, so my mind is literally awash with bullshit self-loathing. So when I got to this point in my script, I decided on a whim to install Hellblade, a game that might as well have been released 20 years ago in YouTube years. So I'm going to answer a question here. Can a depressing game help a depressed man? Well, let's dig in, shall we? The things you do in this game, for the most part, are there to simply tell a story of a shattered woman. A woman who was born with sight that no one else possessed and voices that no one else could hear. The puzzle you do in order to move the game forward are simple affairs, but use interesting mechanics from a story perspective. Senua doesn't do environmental puzzles like most games of this type do. Like physically manipulating objects in the world to bridge gaps, like moving crates to reach a broken ladder. The puzzles in this game are all visual, aside from opening doors and using bridges, linking the gameplay and game world to Senua's mental instability. But the puzzles are also a symptom of her schizophrenia. She puts together patterns that aren't there in the world and attaches meanings to them, believing that these patterns are opening up doors for her that may not have been there all along. She's able to look through archways that change the world around her, and she believes that this is the only way to proceed forward. Senua is capable of manipulating her own mind in order to keep up the illusion that she sees what no one else can see. In Senua's world, we never know what is real, and neither does she. It's a sort of narrative and gameplay cohesion that's missing in most games, but it comes at a price. About 5 hours in, I hate to admit it, but the puzzles were growing pretty damn thin. Then as I got to the area with a wandering ball of flame that I didn't know I wasn't supposed to let see me, I died 3 times. And that's when I started to feel, a little anxious, because the best thing about this game, in my opinion, is the fact that you can only die a certain amount of times before you die permanently, and you must do the whole thing over again. Permadeath. Something we usually only see in older games like roguelikes is now in a game that is a linear experience rife with activities I never want to do again. Partly because some of the sections are boring once you've already done them once, but partly because some sections were truly nerve-wracking. Every battle was a test of concentration for me, especially against the bosses. Permadeath added a special tension to the battles that I'm frankly not at all used to. The idea that if I died one more time had me on the edge of my seat, being very careful at times, reacting with reflexes I didn't even know I had. And this is different than the tension you feel in a Souls-like game. It's different because when you die in a Souls game, you don't have to repeat the entire game over again, and I was much more willing to take risks in that game, under certain circumstances, than I was in Senua's Sacrifice. See, the price of failure was far too steep for that kind of risk. It's a design choice that I really want to applaud because it probably took some bravery on the part of the designers, as there is a very real possibility that you can turn your audience away with that sort of mechanic. The death system, however, is very generous, and I think the decision to put it in the game was merely a decision on the part of the designers to force the players to take every event seriously. The combat is deceptively deep for a game that doesn't emphasize it. As new enemy types get added, you'll find yourself kiting the groups around to attempt to mitigate flanking and mixing up attacks, like for instance charging into a shield bearer and kicking him to stagger him and get a free shot in, or using certain combos against the earlier enemies to break their guard. I found myself wishing there was more combat, more arenas that made better use of the environment and made it necessary to juggle more than 3 mobs. For instance, some of the bridge sections were some of the funnest sections in the game, except for the fact that I couldn't knock anybody off the bridge, which seemed like an oversight on their part. The issue is, though, if you make the battles too tough, would anybody want to try and beat the game again if they died? Because I know I wouldn't. The boss battles can be intense, especially if you play on hard and it's your first time fighting them. Every time I got knocked down, I was seriously worried that I might die again. This worry only comes from the fact that I had a limited number of lives before I had to go and do the whole excruciating thing over again. I feel like there's something to be said for meeting a boss for the first time, watching their attack patterns, and trying to figure them out before mastering their moveset, especially when you know that you can't just die and try again. The problem with this game is that what you spend most of your time doing is a passive experience due to the emphasis on visual puzzles. Simply put, you run around a level to line things up to make a pattern, and while it fits the theme of the story, it doesn't make for a fun gameplay experience. In my opinion, there should have been at least some manipulation of the environment that could have added an element of thought and challenge to the puzzles, while making the player feel like they were actually doing something other than simply walking around and looking at things. In this regard, the game starts to feel a bit like an interactive novel and less like a game. At a certain point in the game, you lose your weapon, and that is when the pacing of the game just grinds to a halt. Just when things were ramping up and getting good, you spend about 7 whole minutes just walking through a ship graveyard. Then you watch a cutscene, which is admittedly beautiful. Then you spend the next hour in puzzles who have a ton of backtracking built into them due to their layout in the map. This wouldn't be a bad thing if the puzzles were interesting, but as I think I've said, they really aren't. The puzzles do a fair bit to change up the monotony, however. Like, for example, there's an infinite hallway puzzle, a puzzle where you phase in and out of different versions of the map to get into a building, and another bit where you're chased around by a blob of fire that kills you by looking at you. The issue is that none of this is new. Many of these ideas have been done before in other games, and frankly done to death, and have been done with much more interesting mechanics that tie into the experience. All in all, I liked experiencing the puzzles once, but that is it. The thought of having to play the game a second time is quite frankly scary. The game is, however, sprinkled with moments that I can only describe as absolutely breathless, meaning that while I played these sections, I had a hard time managing my breathing. In particular, the section where Senua finds herself in complete darkness, and you must find your way through the areas by sound and sense alone. When you come to a house in this section, you find that there's something else in the room with you. Without a sword, you must find your way around the creature without alerting it to your presence. Now, knowing that this thing will likely kill me in one hit, and knowing that I will probably have no lives left at this point, as I wound my way around these pustules of engorging meat, I found myself breathing shallowly, hesitating when I normally wouldn't, whispering to myself, urging Senua to move faster, to not stop until she reached safety, and every time I got to the end of one section, only to find that I had an even tougher section ahead of me, I felt the terror grow inside of me as I gripped my controller tight, taking long, deep breaths. If this game had more sections like this moment of sheer terror and tension, we'd have a perfect set of gameplay moments on our hands. Even without it, however, what we have is an entertaining set of events that are good for one playthrough. So let's talk about the story.
Hello. Who are you? Doesn't matter.
These are the opening words of Senua's Sacrifice, and they were particularly poignant to me. When I worked at a high school in California, I often walked home because I lived very close by and it was cheaper than buying a car. One day on my way home, I met an old woman in a sundress pulling a two-wheeled cart with groceries from the local Arab grocery store behind her. She spotted a bottle in my hand and she asked me if I reused them. That it was a shame to throw them away, and we got to talking. I don't know how it started, but she proceeded to tell me her story. She told me that she was a writer and that she had a copy of her book with her, if I was interested in reading it. Her book was just a yellow envelope with a piece of paper tied to the front of it, bursting with photocopies. The words were written in odd patterns around the paper, like a spiral snaking its way to the center. She seemed a normal enough woman when I was standing there and talking to her, but she had the odd demeanor of someone who would erupt into powerful emotions when a single triggering word was uttered. The packet of paper sat on my desk all day until at some point, while I was cooking dinner, I decided to open it out of a nagging curiosity, and what I saw there were the ravings of a madwoman. A woman who had reached an age and a limit to the trauma that her brain could handle, where everything just snapped. Her thoughts, which were coherent to her, were no longer coherent to the lateral thinking world. Escaped Iran, the Shah, worked at Lockheed Martin, made weapons that killed my own people for most of my life. They took my money. They took my money. The words repeated in different structures and different phrasing, spiraling into a story at different angles on the paper. I found a photocopied check from Lockheed Martin among the copies and a letter to a lawyer associated with a class action lawsuit against the company for shrinking the size of ex-employees' pensions by more than 75%. By the time I had put all the facts together, I found out that she had been committed. She had lost her home and was sleeping in a skate park nearby. A world that had used her up for what she was worth and tossed her aside was now tucking her away in a corner of a hospital somewhere, just a name and a number. And this is why it doesn't matter who we are to the voices in Senua's head. A person desperate to tell their story will tell it to anyone who's willing to listen. Because while it may be too late for them, being that they're too far gone to help, the darkness they see in others can be identified and driven out before it can consume another. To the sensitive, they take on the pain of others. To those that hear voices, they may be the pain of others they knew, long since dead, begging them for help that they cannot give. They feel their story can help and want their story to live on in you. They don't want to die without someone knowing about the pain in their life. We all hear a voice. At least that's what I tell myself. Usually it's just one and it sounds a lot like our own. It comes from our subconscious and our conscious thoughts. Sometimes this voice comes unbidden when we're at our lowest point, when we don't want to dwell on a thought but we can't stop, like a song you hate on the radio that won't stop looping in your head. It's the cause of most of my anxiety, and I'm willing to bet it's the source of some of yours. The difference between us and Senua is that we know the voice is our own, and typically there's only one. The longer we dwell on an unpleasant thought, the more power it gains, the louder it gets, and the harder it is to deal with. I believe that the darkness is a physical manifestation of the damage that an out-of-control, anxiety-ridden subconscious can do to an otherwise healthy human being. For the artist, it is the anxiety that we will never be good enough to achieve what we really hope to achieve. That no matter how hard we work, we will never be as good as those we look up to. At least that's been my experience. The subconscious nags at me whenever I sit down to write anymore, but like Senua, ignoring the voices in her head, I just push on. The voices, the subconscious, it is the darkness that consumes us. Senua's darkness begins when someone she has only watched from afar decides to take interest in her, shows her kindness, shows her love. Whenever we fall in love, a seed in our soul is created. It hasn't budded yet, but it's there. It's a rotting, stinking seed of darkness. It causes our distress when we don't hear back from our mate. It tells us that they're cheating on us, that they found someone else to love and have discarded us. It blossoms when our love has left us, in the lonely moments of life when we sit and wonder why they've left. Our darkness tells us that we aren't good enough for them, and will never be good enough for anyone. It tells us that this is our lot in life, to be alone. I'm reminded of Star Wars, the prequels in particular, for their strictness of code. The idea that love brings passion, and passion leads to the dark side, eventually. The voices in Senua's head tell her that we all struggle in life, and with each failure the darkness grows stronger. So whether you're the artist struggling to find their passion, or the musician struggling to find inspiration, each failure makes the path forward to finding the thing you need darker and darker, until you can no longer find your way. We are the voices in Senua's head. We are the thing that is driving Senua forward, and we are also the darkness that consumes her. We, the player, are Senua's subconscious. Whenever she speaks to Dillion, she speaks directly to us, looking straight into our eyes to address us. We hover behind her, controlling her like a puppeteer. Whenever Dillion speaks to her, the voice is centered, almost mono, so that it sounds like our own voice reverberating against the walls of our skull. We are the darkness as well, the voice that consumes Senua, destroying her confidence, tries to tear her down, causes her to harm herself and place herself in harm's way. The story in Senua's sacrifice is a bit muddled, which makes sense due to the particular way that she thinks. The background, the events of the past, these are all just staging for the true conflict, the conflict that's within Senua, the irrational attachment to a man that's long since gone, the loneliness she filled with voices. The darkness recedes in her at the end, and the message of the game is one of hope. A story of killing or destroying the harmful you, and being reborn healthy and without fear. Fear of failure, fear of inadequacy, fear of loss. We would do best to be without it, because
I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration.
So the question, can this game be a sort of therapy for those who are depressed and find themselves in a dark place with no light to show them the way? It helped me. It helped me to see that there is really only one way through life, and that's straight through to the end. There's no way around it. There is an end. The only question is, will you remain alive in the memories of others, or will your only regret be that you didn't take more risks? This has been a rant from Strat-Edgy, and now that you heard it, go play some games.